Okay, thank you, Mr. Grewal, and then Mr. Dezeau.
Thank you for the witnesses for coming today. How big of a problem is money laundering in Canada, and how many cases have actually made it to court, and how many people have been convicted in, let's say, the last decade or so?
In terms of a specific number to cite, there have been different attempts to put a specific figure on money laundering. Those figures can be in the range of, I think I've seen 5 billion, 20 billion, but inherently we don't know kind of what we don't know. If we could identify the money laundering, then the efforts are to detect and deter and detect. So it is large, it is significant, and it is a threat. We have published a national inherent risk assessment that attempts to speak in more qualitative sense to the nature of the threat and how pervasive it is. So I would refer you to that work. In terms of the prosecutions, the numbers are relatively low when it comes to the money laundering and terrorist financing space in terms of what people often, I think, expect. Ian spoke earlier to the findings of the Financial Action Task Force that pointed to a dynamic that often the law enforcement entities will use financial information that is surfaced through the regime to identify the predicate crimes. And then they will often prosecute the underlying predicate crime rather than necessarily the money laundering or terrorist financing offense. So I would offer that as an alternate aspect of what success looks like.
Yeah, because the question goes that there's $70 million looks like annually that's funded to the organizations that track money laundering and anti-terrorist financing. Mm-hmm. So as a policymaker, the natural question is, well, what is the return on investment? Mm-hmm. How much money is actually being recouped from the financial markets? How many cases are we taking to court? How many people are charged with these offenses? Because in the grand scheme, on a macro level, I don't think anybody's going to argue with you on the need for protection, especially in the global environment that we live in. But there's got to be concrete returns in Canada to ensure that we're on the right line. My second question is that the $10,000 cash limit that you can carry between the U.S. and Canada, that limit got set decades ago. And I guess now, in your report here, it says that we have to have harsher penalties on undisclosed cash. But is there any discussion on raising the limit, because the limit seems to represent an era, like maybe, I don't know, it was set in like the early 90s, I think.
I would describe the $10,000 limit as always subject to discussion, but not an area that we have received a lot of feedback compared to other areas for reform in the regime.
Because my question is this, is that every transaction in any bank in Canada that's over 10,000 gets flagged by FINTRAC. Mm-hmm. So that's got to be thousands of transactions on a daily basis, I would assume. I used to work as a corporate lawyer on Bay Street, and we were always dealing in the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in wire transfers. So how much resources does FINTRAC have to actually go after each little $10,000 transaction? And if I'm money laundering, I'm not doing transactions in the millions to catch attention. I'm doing them at the $10,000, $15,000 limit. Mm-hmm. In order to actually get away with it.
Yeah. So I would respond to your question in two directions. So the first would be to speak to efforts that we have underway with the private sector to not just focus on the specific dollar limit, but find ways that we can focus on the truly suspicious transactions. So that speaks to understanding the typologies of crime, money laundering, terrorist financing, and finding ways to turn that back into actionable algorithms and and practices that will sift through the haystack and find the needles. So, as you say, the number of transactions in Canada that exceed $10,000 are, really quite vast. So that question of, well, how can we focus on what is important is one of the higher level questions that is before us and that we are undertaking with private sector colleagues, and I'm quite certain they will bring forward when they come. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My last question is on digital currency, and I think that we're behind the pendulum here. Billions of dollars of wealth has been created in the cryptocurrency space. Our government, our country, a lot of Western countries are slow to regulate it, really don't understand what it is. If you read a lot of the opinion articles on the internet in established sources, a lot of it has to do with money laundering. Like, people in the black market are trying to legitimize their wealth by coming into the crypto space. What are we doing from a regulation perspective to track this, A, and B, to counter it and see how we can actually stop money laundering in the cryptocurrency space, because it is the next big thing, and we can't be this slow to evolve because the innovation is just changing on a daily basis.
I appreciate the question. It is, again, another one of the higher level questions that stands before us. We've spoken to efforts that we will be bringing forth in coming months in terms of regulating virtual currency dealers. The question of how to put in place the requirements that mean that transactions entering the Canadian financial system are not anonymous and do allow us to meet our Know Your Customer and identify what is suspicious is an active area for all of the regime, and we are seized by it. We share your concerns as you've described very well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raj. Mr. Dussel.